Who was at that meeting?
Senator Morton, sound one, take one.
There was a meeting. I've forgotten the exact date. This can be easily ascertained. I assume that the records have been kept. The burden of it was Admiral Radford's feeling that we should really move in and bring active support to the French, specifically air support from carriers. Carriers were available in the nearby area. How many missions could have been mounted, I don't know. I didn't get into the military details. And it was felt that the artillery that they had on the high ground could be destroyed by air attack.
And they failed always, because they were always seen by the Vietnamese as a foreign power trying to get back his colonial power. That is why they lost the war at Dien Bien Phu.
Dien Bien Phu has fallen. I join with you in paying tribute to the gallant defenders. May it be given us to play a worthy part to defend the values for which they gave their lives. The defense of Dien Bien Phu of 57 days and nights will go down in history as one of the most heroic of all time. The defenders, composed of French and native forces, inflicted staggering losses on the enemy.
In Giap's treatment, Giap's writing about this, it appears that he was well ready. In Dien Bien Phu, he was ready if he had chosen to assault and did not, some 8 weeks before the final movement took place. And I would submit that the reason for this is that Giap and Ho Chi Minh understood the political nature of this particular battle, and they wanted the politics, the public opinion in France and in the rest of the world, among the other powers, to build, to give this a great deal more importance than it had militarily.
I think the American people this fall, when they elect a Congress, all of the congressmen, 1/3 of the Senate, regardless of whether they're going to vote Democrat or Republican, should ask those senators and congressmen, say to them, Mister, if we send you to Washington, are you going to continue sending American money to nations which in turn ship the sinews of economic and military strength to Red China, which is running the war in Indochina, keeping in mind that if we lose Indochina, Mr. Jenkins, we will lose the Pacific and we'll be an island in a communist sea.
The situation in the area as we found it was that it was subject to the so-called domino theory. That meant that if one nation went, then another nation would go, and so on. We're trying to change that so it won't be the case. That's the whole theory of collective security.
Agreement between the Commander-in-Chief of the French Union forces in Indochina and the Commander-in-Chief of the People's Army of Vietnam on the cessation of hostilities in Vietnam, signed at Geneva, July 20, 1954. Article 14. Pending the general elections which will bring about the unification of Vietnam, the conduct of civil administration in each regrouping zone shall be in the hands of the party whose forces are to be regrouped there in virtue of the present agreement. Article 16. With effect from the date of entry into force of the present agreement, the introduction into Vietnam of any troop reinforcements and additional military personnel is prohibited. Article 18. With effect from the date of entry into force of the present agreement, the establishment of new military bases is prohibited throughout Vietnam territory.
We support the objectives that are involved in this thing because it was done in the Eisenhower administration in 1954. We were not signers of the so-called Class B treaty or convention at Geneva, Switzerland, but we did make a formal and solemn pledge that we were going to safeguard the independence and the freedom of Vietnam. Now, we can renege if we like, but what will happen to our credibility in the world if we take that course?
Every day, someone jumps up and shouts and says, "Tell us what is happening in Vietnam and why are we in Vietnam and how did you get us into Vietnam?" Well, I didn't get you into Vietnam. You've been in Vietnam 10 years.
Saigon was in a state of civil war. The rebel Bin Xuyen movement tried to incite the people to overthrow the government. In 36 hours non-stop fighting, 500 were killed, more than 1,000 wounded. Vietnam Premier Diem was still in office when we received these pictures. Unfortunately, the West does not agree about Saigon. General Ely, on-the-spot commander for France, is instructed to oppose Diem. Malcolm MacDonald has flown there reportedly to do the same, whereas America stands behind Premier Diem. Meanwhile, Saigon suffers the agonies of civil war. In Cannes is the absentee Emperor Bao Dai. First reported deposed, Bao Dai may stage a comeback. As it is, Vietnam seems ripe for communist invasion.
Diem, I said before, was the man of the hour. Why? Once colonialism came to an end through the victory of the Viet Minh against the French at Dien Bien Phu and through the agreement in Geneva, this trend in Vietnamese history, which favored the communists exclusively, could be broken. Since colonialism, the creator of communism, so to speak, was now dead, there was a chance that other forces might be able to compete with Ho Chi Minh. However, under certain conditions, they had to be as nationalistic as Ho Chi Minh. They had to be free of the taint of collaboration with the French. They had to be the opposite of puppets of colonialism. Now, Diem was precisely that man.
A lot of it was rather skillfully done in public relations, I think. There's no doubt about that. There was sort of a cult of the little fellow in the sharkskin suit and the little Mandarin who's going to stop the Reds. And there was a great many articles along this line, you know, sort of Ngo Dinh Diem, our man in Saigon.
You have exemplified in your corner of the world patriotism of the highest order. You have brought to your great task of organizing your country the greatest of courage, the greatest of statesmanship, qualities that have aroused our admiration and make us indeed glad to welcome you. I thank you very much.
Part of my involvement with Vietnam was to be active in founding the so-called American Friends of Vietnam, a private organization dedicated to the promotion of understanding, spread of information, and support of Diem. I was, in fact, more or less running the organization as chairman of the executive committee.
The American Friends of Vietnam was a lobby group set up, I think, about 1955, really to lobby for the Ngo Dinh Diem regime in this country. And I think the particularly interesting thing about it was that it was so much of it, and so many of its more distinguished names were liberal names, people like